Welcome, everyone. And thank you for joining us for today's event, Leadership in a World of Uncertainty. My name is Leo Bagdasarian, a managing director of the AIER's Bastiat Society of San Francisco. Just a little bit about the American Institute of Economic Research. It was founded in 1933 as one of the oldest nonpartisan economic research and advocacy organizations in the country. Through the Bastiat Society program, the AIER makes ideas that enable peace, full trade, and human flourishing available to a wider audience. We have two amazing speakers joining us today. Retired General George W. Casey and CEO of Forescout, Gregory S. Clark. For questions, please save them to the end. We may have some time. Our first speaker is retired four-star general and the 36th Chief of Staff of the United States Army, General George Casey, who served from 2007 to 11. General Casey led what is arguably the most complex organization and the largest organization with 1.1 million people and an annual budget of $200 billion during one of the most extraordinary periods in military and global political history. He became chief of staff of an army that was stretched from 6 years of continuous war. Over his tenure, he stabilized and transformed the army to meet the challenges of the 21st century while continuing to meet the demands of two wars. Currently, he lectures on leadership to national and multinational corporations and to business schools. He has written articles on leadership and VUCA. General Casey, it is a pleasure to have you on today. Thank you for joining us.
Well, my pleasure, Leo. Are you all on the West Coast mostly? Am I the only one on the East Coast?
I think we have some folks who are joining us from the East Coast.
Okay. Well, go ahead.
Just to begin, some of our audience may not be familiar with VUCA. Could you share a little bit about VUCA and what it is?
Sure. It's interesting how I rediscovered VUCA. Shortly after I retired, I got a call from the dean of the Keenan Flagler Business School at University of North Carolina. And she said, General, could you come down and talk to our executive MBA program about leading in a VUCA world? I said, absolutely, Dean, no problem. And I hung up and I Googled VUCA. And I imagine my chagrin when I found out that it was a term coined by the United States Army War College in 1989 to describe what they thought the world would look like after the demise of the Soviet Union: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And as I prepared for that presentation, I realized that I'd seen VUCA in Bosnia in 96, in Kosovo in 2000, and I saw it in spades in Iraq in 2004. And things only got more complex. And so it's a way that I use to describe our world today. And what I find is that the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity, the ambiguity, they all come at you one at a time, but then they all come at you together. And collectively, they impede a leader's ability to understand, to decide, to communicate, and ultimately to act decisively. And to succeed in the VUCA world, I believe you have to have an offensive mindset. You have to create the future you want through action. And I started saying that in Iraq as the commander, and I told all the new leaders coming in that the environment was, I didn't know VUCA at that time, but I said the environment is so complex and so overwhelming that if you're not focused on the enemy and trying to be opportunistic, you'll get overwhelmed. And so now, as I talk to my business school classes, I say, look, this offensive mindset, you build it through humility, one, and it might seem strange that an offensive mindset starts with humility, but you have to accept the fact that we're all human. We can't read people's minds. We can't predict the future. And in the Army, we say, because we're human, there's only two kinds of plans. those that might work and those that won't work. And because we're human, the best we're going to do is something that might work. You have to accept that. And I found that having that level of humility, it allowed me to reach high and strive for things I might not achieve, but then not be overly disappointed and self-flagellating when if I didn't succeed. Then the second thing you have to do is you have to accept what I call the Vuca Paradox. Jim Collins wrote a book called Great by Choice, and he called it the control non-control paradox. But he looked at 20,400 companies, and he tried to find companies that outperformed their industry by 10 times. He found 7. And he found all 7 accepted the Vuca Paradox. They accepted the fact that their environment would be Vuca, but they didn't accept the fact that external factors would determine their results. And they used that to drive their organizations forward to success. The third thing is you have to do your homework. I found that I built conviction through knowledge. That there's an old Sun Tzu quote that says, enlightened leaders make decisions with a clear mind and a pure heart. When I made tough decisions in Iraq and in the Army, I had to be confident that I had a clear mind, that I had dived deeply into the subject, brought in as many diverse opinions as I could and conflicting opinions, but that I'd done my homework. And then the second thing I had to do was be able to look myself in the mirror and accept the fact that I did it with a clear heart, a pure heart. So clear mind, pure heart. And if I was doing it for the good of the organization and not myself, and I'd done my homework, it gave me the conviction that the plan might work. And that gave me the courage to act in the swirl of the VUCA events. So offensive mindset.
No, offensive mindset, humility, which speaks about human culture. And in previous presentations, you've noted the warrior spirit. How does the spirit or the culture influence the success of the organization and the management and the team and the mission?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting to me that unless you are the people who really appreciate culture are the people that have led large organizations because they see the positive or negative impacts of culture on the ability of the organization to perform. Obviously, a positive culture is really important, but culture can also impede the success of an organization. And I'll just give you a quick example. When I came back from Iraq, I was getting spun up on the Army, what was going on in the Army, and I saw reports that said 90% of the men and women in the Army, so 9 out of 10 soldiers, would not get assistance for a behavioral health problem because they thought it would affect their career. 90%. And just coming out of Iraq, I saw the impact of combat on soldiers and on myself and on my leaders. And I realized that I was going to have to do something to change the Army's culture to get men and women to come forward if they had challenges. Because at that time, we probably had diagnosed 200,000 or so with post-traumatic stress and probably another 200,000 with traumatic brain injury. Most of those were concussions, but still, that's a lot of folks. And so I had to design a program that made mental fitness part of being a good soldier. So it was accepted by the culture. And if I didn't, I mean, I stood to lose, as you said, I mentioned those numbers, you know, 250,000 men and women unavailable to the Army because of their behavioral health issues. And so I had to hit that part of culture if I was going to move it forward. I talk to young startups. I say, look, you've got to start forming and shaping the culture you want now, because as you add more people, if you're not clear about how you want the culture, if things get even more fragmented.
You're noting the various changes you're addressing in the midst of war. How does one, I mean, it's hard enough to fight two wars and take on such a responsibility. How does one transform in the midst of volatility? And what are some lessons you could share that could be applied to business in a VUCA world?
Well, the first one is focus. That you have to, that leaders have to drive that level of organizational change. And when I was the deputy, the vice chief of staff of the Army, right before I went to Iraq, we the Army had started the largest organizational transformation since World War II. And it was ongoing while we were deploying 150,000 troops to combat, bringing them home, and sending another 150,000 over. It was a huge undertaking. And so when I came back, it had been going on for 4 years. And it was going to take probably another 3 to finish. And I made the decision that we were going to finish what we started before we started tweaking it and making adjustments to it. So that level of stability allowed us to finish it and get through it. And then the other thing was, as I said, you have to drive it. And it's interesting to me, the higher I got in the organization, the more I had to take personal control of my calendar to make sure that the things that were important to me were on my calendar, and not the things that were important to everybody else. And so I would, for the different aspects of the transformation, we would have monthly or quarterly sessions on each of those different aspects to keep people focused on it and keep it moving forward.
You write in your book, years of experience at the strategic level have taught me that the higher up you go, the less guidance you receive. Where did you find guidance? Or where can one find guidance that's not always necessarily apparent?
Yeah, this is interesting. This is a little bit of inside baseball from Washington, but I never got a bit of written direction from a civilian leader. And I don't mean this in a critical way, but they don't tend to like to put things in writing because they can be held accountable for them. And so they prefer to give you verbal guidance. Well, when you give verbal guidance, it's not quite as precise. And so what we did, the ambassador and I, as we tried to figure out what we were going to do in Iraq, they gave us 30 days. The president and the secretary of defense said, you go and take 30 days to get a sense of what's happening, and then tell us what you think we ought to do. Give us a plan. And so it was a pretty hectic 30 days. But we did, and then we briefed them back on our plan, and they approved it. And there was one side of me that said, great, they approved it. I'm not going to get a lot of meddling from Washington. On the other hand, I probably should have asked a few more questions to ensure that I had mind meld between the president and the secretary and me, to make sure that we saw this exactly the same. And in the Army, we have a little process called briefbacks, where, for example, when I finished my campaign plan, I briefed the 3-star commander, or my staff did, and I gave him a week to build his own plan. And then I went down and he briefed me back on how he was going to execute the plan I gave him. And we, obviously, it's like I was not as clear as I thought I was, and we had a dialogue, and we ironed things out. And then, because it was so important, I gave him another week to develop a plan and brief it to his 2 stars. And then I went down to the 2 stars and had them brief me back. And we did the same thing. And it's like the telephone game. As you go through different levels of your organization, things get twisted around. And this little brief back technique is just a way that we use to get mind meld here. So that's kind of that was a way that I found of clarifying guidance.
So you're working with multiple layers within both on the military as well as political side. And there's the strategic, the operational, and the tactical levels.
I'm very impressed, Leo. Very impressed.
Thank you. How do you not get caught up in the details? And how do you know what to focus on in this in such large operations?
The number one lesson that I learned, it was probably a relearned lesson in Iraq, was that we did best when leaders stayed at their level. When I stayed at the strategic level and didn't get involved in the 3 stars jobs. And when the 3 stars stayed at their level and didn't get involved in the 2 stars and the colonel's jobs. But as you go up the ladder, you're more comfortable with the rung below you that you just left, right? Because you know how to do that. But as you get to the next level, you're learning again. And nobody walks into a job the first day and is completely qualified. Everybody that's successful grows in the job. And so I had to force myself to stay at the strategic level. And guess what? The tasks at the strategic level are harder than the tasks at the operational level. And they take more of a leader's time. And they're not as fun as the things that go on at the operational level. And so you get dragged down. And to be successful, you have to keep dragging yourself back up to do the really hard things that are important to the success of the organization. Let me just, there's 4 things that I brought back with me in Iraq that I used in the Army. I call them the 4 focus areas. And these are the 4 areas where if the leaders at the top of the organization put their time and energy in these 4 areas, the organization is generally successful. Developing and communicating vision and strategy, building the team, setting the internal and external conditions for success, and preparing the organization for success in the future. One of the things I tell folks is, success exists in the future, and it's a leader's job to prepare the organization for success in the future. And your last quarterlies are history, right? It's what are you going to do in the next quarter, and the next quarter, and the next quarter after that. That's the leader's job, and that's the hard part.
In wrapping up this section, General, I have one last question. Leadership has been defined in a number of ways. How would you define leadership, and how did those requirements hold up in a VUCA world?
Okay, well, I'll give you the Casey definition. Leadership is the act of influencing people to achieve results and prepare for the future. The act of influencing people to achieve results and prepare for the future. It's an act. It's not a process. It's what you do. It's how the things that you purposefully do to influence people inside and outside your organization to do the things that are most essential for the organization's success. And it's about people. This influencing is about inspiring and motivating people to achieve more than they think is possible. I find that everybody wants to be number one, but most people individually aren't disciplined enough to do it on their own, but they can do it as part of a team, and the leader can elevate those people to do it. And if you think about the organizations that have been successful in transitioning through this COVID period, the ones that put people first are the ones that have been most successful. And the last 2, achieve results. That's why you get paid the big bucks, right? You're paid to deliver. You're prepared. You're paid to bring these people together to accomplish what you say you're going to do. And then, as I said, prepare for the future, because that's where success really exists.
General Casey, thank you for sharing your wisdom. As we switch over to our next speaker, from leadership in the battlefields of Iraq to transitioning to leadership in the battlefields of the corporate world, I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Gregory Clark, and I want to transition over with the quote from General Casey. We live in a VUCA world where technology continues to march, where technology's continuous march ties us closer and closer together, and non-state actors have access to instruments of catastrophic destruction. We are in a period of constant and fundamental change that will require agile, adaptive leaders who have the vision to see opportunities in volatile and ambiguous situations, the courage to act in the face of complexity and uncertainty, and the character and resilience to make tough calls and bounce back from unexpected setbacks. Our leaders must also focus their intellectual and emotional energies in areas that will have the highest payouts for their organizations. We welcome such a leader in the corporate world, Australian entrepreneur, businessman, investor, CEO Greg Clark, who has an extensive history and background in security systems and software. Greg Clark served as CEO and member of the board of directors for Symantec Corporation. Prior to joining Symantec, he was the CEO of Blue Coat Systems. He also founded and served as president and CEO of E2 Open, and earlier in his career founded the security software firm Dascom. He has co-authored, and it's a must-read for anyone who is in security and in making policies, Security Intelligence, A Practitioner's Guide to Solving Enterprise Security Challenges. He is currently the CEO of Forescout and a managing partner at Crosspoint Capital. Greg, thank you for joining us today on the program. How are you?
Really good, Leo, and thanks for inviting me. I must, just to kick off, General Casey, that was a fantastic set of remarks. And as a corporate transformation person, I took many notes from your comments that will serve me well in the future. And thanks for your service to our country. I was actually born at a plutonium breeder reactor in Moscow, Idaho. My parents migrated to Australia when I was a baby. So, great. But,
well, thank you very much. And I've got my pen out to take some notes from you.
Go ahead, Leo. Yeah.
Greg, could you share a bit about your origins and when you realized you wanted to found a company and create a company and take on these major leadership roles?
You know, I think when I was a young person, you know, I went to college in Australia and I ended up getting a job at Bell Labs in New Jersey back when, you know, when Bell Labs for the young people was a powerhouse of innovation and technology. And I really enjoyed that. And I worked there for a few years, and I saw the internet when it was before it was the internet, before Netscape or anything happened back in the early 90s. And there was a couple of engineers that I worked with there, and I remember saying to them, we need to go start a startup company on the West Coast and put some security on this, and then it could go pretty well. And you know, so I got after it from when I was a young man in my early 20s, and you know, founded a company called Dascom, which ended up being acquired by IBM, and I ran the security systems technology business at IBM as a distinguished engineer there for a few years. So I was from an early age, but I'm one of those people, Leo, that I had a job when I was 8 and I was walking the dogs and delivering papers and stuff. I get up early and I, you know, stay after it all day.
As you're progressing from founding a company, the IBM acquisition, to becoming a CEO of Symantec, how did the skill set requirement change, and how did you know how to change?
You know, I think, you know, my career progression, you know, I built a startup company, and then I learned a lot from IBM Corporation after the acquisition of Dascom. I learned about how to do things at scale, you know, how to influence, you know, a global sales force to pick something up and take it forward and you know, represent it. I learned a lot from the great folks that worked at IBM at the time. And then I went from there to another startup company called E2 Open, which was really in the, you know, I'd solved all the security problems in my mind at that time, which was around 2000, and would like to have done something, you know, a little different. So I joined the founding team of a company called E2 Open, which was in the high-tech supply chain. And this was in, you know, everyone had sold their factories, and, you know, manufacturing was being done in high-tech electronics overseas, primarily in Taiwan and China. And people had lost control of visibility to their supply chains. And so this was a big issue. And so, you know, IBM and a bunch of other trading partners got together and put together a bunch of money, and we went after building, you know, and I was building a solution for visibility into that very complicated supply chain. And, I was probably one of the few entrepreneurs that was at IBM at the time. And I remember the vice chairman, Nick D'Onofrio, came to see me and said, Greg, we need you to go over there because we don't have anybody that knows what to do when there's no office and no people. And so I headed off to E2Open. We built a great company, went public on the NASDAQ. And I think 4 weeks ago, it traded again for $2.6 billion to another, and it's back on the stock market public again. So great company. But I think, and then following that, I worked for private equity firms for a while with the transformation of Mincom, Blue Coat Systems and Symantec. And then, I was also board members at plenty of other companies and whatnot. And I would say that, the needs, what happens is as you're a young entrepreneur, I would say that you always have to have ears on to listen to kind of where you need to improve, and having the ability to change yourself is super important as you kind of move through your career, to understand what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, and to listen, have your ears on for how you can do better. And as you kind of move from an early stage entrepreneur where you pursue all available opportunity without concern for resource, to where you're actually running something like General Casey was talking about, where you've got a big machine and you don't know everybody, and you got huge employee bases and big cultures, and tech is a full contact sport. If you don't show up ready to play, you get hurt in tech. It's you've got to win it technically. So there's lots of growing to do. But I think just always have your eyes open for what's good, and try to change yourself as a leader, and do a lot of listening.
An immense amount of complexity, whether it's acquisitions or in the field of war. How do you anticipate? What are some things that you look for to, as a leader, to just see where the company's going, where the leadership is, and to kind of see ahead of the curve?
Yeah, I think a couple of things really matter. One of them, you have to have a firm strategy, rudder in the water at all the time. And people, sort of, they tend to do a leap of faith or a gut feel on strategy, and I think you got to take it a little further. You've really got to do your work to understand the space you're in, to understand what your advantage is, where you think the white space is, and really try to get that strategy sorted out in a way that you can communicate it to others. And then as you organize your company, making sure that you've got people with clear responsibilities, so everyone knows what their job is, what the responsibility of their piece of the organization is, and how they're in support of that strategy. And then strategy is not a one-time event. It's a continuous sport. So you've always got to be tuning at it, looking at it, learning, changing it. It's like that strategy white paper that you want to write and put on the shelf and tell people that's what you do, or that strategy statement on the website. That needs to be a living, breathing organism, because it is the external factors that need to cause that to change and need to cause that to evolve. And the second thing is, you got to listen to your customers. You got to listen to the market. I always, when I've turned around, big companies like Blue Coat or Mincom or Symantec, there's usually two people in the two cohorts in the organization that knows what's going on. And often it doesn't include management. And that's the customers, and that's the individual contributor employees. And if you can get the shields down and get truth from those two cohorts, you can actually really affect change in your business and really bring it to true north.
So building teams, we delegate. What makes management strong and reliable, and what are some things to look for when building a strong team?
I think I always try to implement a strong management cadence. And what do I mean by that? I mean, you've got to get together and talk about what's going on, and then you've got to communicate deep into the organization. So I like to have cadence of sort of the senior leadership team, like the executives that may report up into the CEO, and then an extended team that even drops down into a lot of the reports that report into those folks. And if you can get yourself to a cadence where you're getting together every month, you're closing books, you're looking at numbers, and everyone hates to look at numbers in startup companies, but you got to force yourself to do it. And then you're having a strategic conversation after that, and you're really understanding whose roles are there, what are their responsibilities, and what are the KPIs and what are the measurements. And then what I often ask the people to do, and this is very similar to your feedback mechanism, General Casey, that you mentioned in the Army, I always ask those folks to send an email to their team about what happened in that meeting every month, and map that onto what is their sort of local area and the issues and opportunities that they have in there. Because that kind of deep communication, strategy, cadence, communication, and doing that on a continuous basis is super important to keep the organization aligned, make sure that everybody knows what's happening, what's good, what's bad, and then really drive that communication into the organization. So I really look for those elements, to set up a operational cadence and a rudder in the business that keeps it on track and keeps it able to move quickly. And the last thing you want to see as a tech leader is on an employee survey, we don't like the communication. We're not sure what the strategy is. We don't know if we're winning or not. And these are really easy to avoid with a good operational management cadence and communication policy.
As time goes on, what is some advice you would give on prioritizing and executing objectives?
I think really setting up those KPIs for each part of the business is extremely important. I think it's something that if you ever show up at a private equity firm, they're going to make you do it, which is really looking at each function in the business and understanding what the goals are for that business and how to measure those KPIs, and then kind of rinse and repeat that through the cadence. I think that's super important. But I would say also, just in terms of themes or sort of background music for a company, every time when you're an entrepreneurial outfit, you like to talk about what's going great, and you're typically a cheerleader at the CEO, the visionary, but you got to spend an equal amount of time on what's not working, and really build a culture of truth about things that are broken, because people don't like things that are broken and they'll try to fix them, just like everyone wants to do a good job, but often they don't know what they are, or they don't know how to fix them. But if you start discussing, what's wrong, what's not working, why is that growth rate only 5% when our competitors are growing at 15%, or in tech sometimes that's a 40% number, whatever. But these are just a discussion about what isn't working is extremely valuable in the management team, and to really get to that's not a punitive situation. If you can decriminalize the fact that a plan's not working, or you then start to get to the problems in it, and you can then morph and change that, and where it's a strategic decision, you can make that pivot earlier. And I think these are really important topics.
Yeah, I feel like you're touching upon something that's so important that sometimes management or employees might feel it might be difficult for them to go up to management and express their ideas or their concerns for some reason. So how would you define successful leadership and effective leadership in managing large organizations or small organizations?
I think it's like large organizations. I've run a top 8 software company, Fortune 500 stock, these kind of things, and I've also run some tiny little companies that were just few 40, 50 employees, and all things in between. And I would say that culture and values is kind of where you start. You've got to have strong values and strong culture, and you've got to lean on those values when you have tough decisions to make. And every management team has tough decisions to make, and very few of them have a situation where that's infrequent. Usually that's a fairly frequent problem in any business as it's growing or as it's shrinking. And so really understanding a very strong value statement for the business. What are the top 5 or 6 things we care about? What is the culture? What is the behaviors that we accept in the business? I always start there. And then, just like a sports team, you can get a team of champions that doesn't act as a team and they'll lose. And you get a team of reasonable, competent people that would get a start. And if they play as a team, they can take down anything. And I think it's really being able to foster that culture of, you have to have the roles and responsibilities, you have to have the accountability, you have to have the KPIs, but you also have to have the ability to support each other, pick up the pieces when something breaks and get back on with it. And, rather than pointing finger and saying, you didn't do your job, it's going to cost us our bonus. It's really a culture. And people say, what do you do for a living, Greg? And I say, I create environments where great people can be successful. And I think that that's really a very important aspect to the fabric behind any team. And then I think you got to have a good X-ray on the business. What does it take to win? You have to be financially fit in any business today. It doesn't matter what it is. And so I always start off with financial fitness. Do we have the cost basis right in here? Do we have the right investment in each pieces? Then you set up a bunch of KPIs and some plans and some goals. Don't do any top-down work. That's not useful. Bottoms up everything. If you say we're going to go from 30 million to 90 million to 150 million, back into that organization when it's $150 million in size, and to see if you can understand what it looks like then, from where you are. If you're trying to do that over 2 or 3 years, you'll learn a lot from just trying to draw that business at that scale. And, it's really seriously difficult to, get that planning right, get those measurements right. But really it is, you've got to have roles and responsibilities, you've got to have KPIs, you have to be able to measure it. And then it's really about adjusting as reality happens and from the outside world.
You're touching upon a lot of important things that future leaders should look at and keep in mind as they progress. And I just have one last question before we open it up to the audience for a short Q&A, and that's, the leaders of tomorrow are made today. What's one bit of advice you would give young entrepreneurs or future leaders, maybe in their 20s and 30s?
I really resonate with General Casey's comment on humility. You really need to be a servant leader. You have to have some backbone and some fabric, and drive a great culture and kind of work ethic and everything. But a lot of entrepreneurs, especially out here on the West Coast, get ahead of steam, and it's that monkey gets up on your back and it'll destroy your company, it'll destroy your opportunity. So make sure that your ability to remain normal and humble, especially if you have success, and you take a company to 5x the value of when you got there. Or if it's a startup company that breaks out, that's when that monkey will get on your back. And just don't let it in. Stay normal, stay humble, and really drive success to the team. It's about it's about the, a good idea has many fathers. You're a successful leader when your thoughts and influence are coming out as original thought from your team and the other members that really drives through the organization. And I think that's really a key point. And be adult about the stuff that's not working. It's often easier to bury the hard thing under the rug while you plow ahead on the stuff that's working, but that hard thing's coming out. It's just a matter of time. And so, quicken those difficult decisions would be good advice.
Greg, thank you. Thank you so much. I want to just take a moment to open it up for questions. For those who do have questions, please find me and direct the questions directly to me. I'll go ahead and read them to the speakers.
While we're waiting, can I just say, Greg, I'm not surprised, but what synergy there is between the way you saw things and the way I saw things. I mean, it just I would say, just to add on to one thing, when you talked about growing as a leader as you go up into different jobs, I found that every time I went to a new job, especially when I was moving between levels from tactical to operational and operational to strategic, I had to ask myself, are the skills that got me here the skills that are going to take me to the next level? And usually the answer was no.
Exactly.
And so you never stop learning, and you never stop
Right.
getting new skills. But anyway,
That is
thank
so
you.
right. You know, and I remember when I took over as a CEO of Symantec, which was a big step up for me. I'd never run anything that big. That was a big company all over the world, 38 countries, you know, driving, you know, it was 2 times bigger than the next cyber defense firm in the world, which was inside of Cisco. You know, big stock on Wall Street, and, you know, all the responsibilities that come with that. And I had a really great mentor, a guy by the name of Dan Schulman, who's the CEO of PayPal. And he sort of showed me the ropes on, you know, kind of how to survive in that ring. And I think as you do step up in your career to those next things where you're not experienced in that theater, to really look for advisors that have been there before. And, you know, there's plenty of them around. You know, folks that have, you know, been, you know, in the later areas of their career, or folks that are, you know, good partners. You know, find one of those, talk to them, just go and have dinner, have lunch, and just catch up in general. And I think that's a, you know, huge piece of advice. I wouldn't be here today if I didn't have some amazing mentors along the way that sort of showed me the ropes. Exactly what General Casey just said, when you sort of break through to a new level, and it's, you know, it's always tough in there, and there's always the rookie moves, the foot faults that happen that you wish you 2 years later you geez, I wish someone told me not to do that. You know, it's like obvious.
Yeah, you hope it's just a foot fault.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, I tell you, I'll give you a point in case. At one time, I was working on a transformation of a company that needed a lot of expense work done, and I said, you know, we're going to get this over once and put it behind us. And I regretted that for years, because, you know, P&L management is a continuous sport. You're always doing it. And you know, if you're ever in a situation where you've got to shrink, never say that. Okay, try to get your management team to understand that keeping the company vibrant at the bottom, where you pay the bills from, cash is like shoes. You can't cross the desert without shoes, and you need it when it's tough. And, you know, P&L management is a continuous sport. It's not a one-time thing. And you got to ingrain that in your culture as you grow, because you grow a lot in our industries. And then sometimes you get through periods like we're in now, where sometimes you got to shrink a lot. And it's the shrinking a lot sport that is ill understood in the industry. And but in your time as a leader, that's going to happen to your career. It usually happens about once every 9 or 10 years, but it's going to happen. And how you handle yourself during those times is highly distinguishing.
We have more of a compilation of a few questions that we got. It touches upon growth and contraction. Is how do we establish a healthy culture, healthy progress in this very volatile virtual world that we're all kind of trending toward?
You know, I would say the answer is it depends. You know, sometimes you can't grow because something like March happened a lot, you know, earlier in the year, and it you know, big external events happen that affect your business in a big way. And I think, you know, just be ready for those. But then also, you've got to always be looking for white space. You know, when you're running a firm, you know, if you keep looking at all the cars that you're going to smash into in the race, and the wall and all that kind of stuff, you won't get there. You got to look at the white space too. You got to look at the opportunity. Where is the adjacency? Where is something else my customer needs? And always get yourself into a situation where you can ask the market and ask the customer questions. What else should I do? Where else do you see value? You know, and the market and the customer will tell you that a lot of those answers. Now you fortify those with your own strategic thinking. But I think, you know, growth, you know, I took over a company in 2011 named Blue Coat Systems. It had 8 sequential quarters of down revenue. We made a couple of small changes. It had 5 years of straight up revenue. We didn't even change the product, you know, for the first couple of years. And why? Because we listened to the customers. What are we doing that you like? What are we doing that you don't like? And we pivoted that great company to, which was a very important company in the world of cyber defense, to a fantastic position. And I think, growth is something that you got to have a nose for, but always, look for those adjacencies, look for, where is the white space.
Let me take a shot at that, if I could. On the healthy culture, you go right back to what Greg said early on in his talk. It's all about a clear statement of what you value, and it's not easy to do. I do some work with a rather large credit union, and they had just a new CEO came in, and he was trying to move the credit union forward, and so.
George, you went on mute.
I do some of my best work on mute.
You're only there for a second.
Yeah. So anyway, I was working with this credit union that had just moved away from a very controlling CEO to one who wanted to loosen things up a little bit. And so I went around and I was talking to the executive team, and I said, "What's the culture?" And like 8 out of 9 said, "Well, it's not Fred. We're not going to be like Fred. We're going to be different." And I said, "Well, that's fine, but what do you value? You can't go around and tell people not Fred. You have to figure out what you value and say so." And to his credit, it took him about 3 years to get the values that he really internalized and put them forward, because you have to own them as a leader if you're going to drive them into the organization. Second thing I'd say is about progress. One of the things I see, especially small and medium-sized businesses, is they don't really understand the value of momentum. And they understand the value of it, they don't understand how to get it. And one of the things I've found is that you have to build momentum into your plan. You have to string together or plan to string together a series of successes. And then when you hit each of those, you celebrate them. And it's important for people inside the organization and outside the organization to see that you're doing what you said you were going to do, and you're moving forward. Those would be my 2 points I'd add to that.
Here, General Casey, the value of momentum, you guys should write that down, print that and stick that up on the top of your monitor. And how do you get there? You get there through makeable plans. I wrote something down that General Casey said in there: plans that might work and plans that won't work. You've got to serve up to your team a makeable plan. And that plan, from common sense analysis, as people look at it, can we grow it at 15%? We've got this many people in the field, they produce this much, that equals this number. Yeah, we could do that. But if you gave them a number, something that would require them to deploy twice as much salespeople, and they say that's never going to happen. So you've got to set people makeable plans. And then I couldn't agree more, General Casey. That is such a major driver in a company. Is the company needs to win. The company needs to beat the plan by a little bit. And then you've got to celebrate that. And you've got to put people up on the stage that are examples of that culture and value that's got you there. So we'll move on to the next question.
We're kind of pressed on time. Our hour is coming to a close. So I see a lot of questions. I'm sorry I can't get to everyone's questions. I want to conclude by just saying thank you to General Casey and Greg Clark for dedicating time to the Boss outside of San Francisco, for sharing their wisdom, their insight, their knowledge, their experience. These are very valuable lessons that are truly hard to find, and each bit is a nugget of gold we should value and bring to life. I like to leave the listeners with a final thought. Leadership is vital to our success, the success of our team and our organizations. The world, as we can all see, is going to get more volatile, more VUCA. But we should welcome it and not shy away from it. The subjects discussed today and some of the lessons We, the listeners, the audience, the aspiring future leaders, can learn, share, and incorporate into our lives and organizations. So when we are met with uncertainty, and we will be met with uncertainty, we, much like our speakers and our guests today, can confront it with the open mind, wisdom, courage, and sound values. And I'd like to conclude with that. And thank you again for everyone for joining, and thank you to our speakers.
Okay,
Thank
Leo.
you, Leo.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank
Great to be
you,
with you.
General Casey.
Yeah.
Pleasure working with you today. You guys.
Likewise.
Yeah,
Likewise.
fantastic.
Bye, everybody.
Have a good afternoon. Bye.